Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this session on service contract. My name is David Leclerc. It's an honor to, I've been invited to chair this session. What we'll do this morning is basically have a discussion with our panelists about the situation that we're all living regarding service contracts. Maybe a few housekeeping notes before we get started. The first one is, at this time, I'd like you to make sure that your phone is set to silent. And the second point I'm going to make is that at some point we will open the discussion to the floor for any questions. When that happens, if you want to address the panelists, please reach the microphones. Otherwise, there's a recording and people that will listen in 10 years from now will not be able to listen to what you're saying. Session today has been called Exploring Paths of Value Optimization, and I'll admit this is not the best title I've ever had for a presentation, but essentially I'm going to move around my slides a little bit here, but essentially what the discussion I'd like to have with this group is try to identify ways to make the service contract increase the value for our users. So essentially, this is a slide that you see is from a marketing presentation that I have upcoming. The general idea is, if you look at what you value, what the vendors value, and what the core facility values, the service contract essentially should, we should find the merging point between all three sets of values so that everybody's happy with this transaction. And if we do not reach that point, essentially the service contract becomes something that is valueless to anybody, and nobody wins. And so currently my feeling is that we're kind of moving away. Those circles are kind of moving away from one another. What exactly could happen so that the service contracts becomes more attractive to the users, so that core facility wins, the user wins, and company wins as well. And so it was important to me when we had this discussion to have a voice from industry. So I'm very pleased to have Roy Martin join us from Waters. And then we have the core facility point of view from Brooke Bean Massani, as well as I'm very pleased to introduce to the ABRF audience, Julie Auger, who has a long career in core facilities, and I think her point of view will be a very valued one. So at this point, I'm going to ask my panelists to please introduce yourself and maybe present your group and what is your philosophy regarding service contracts. And I'll start with Roy, please.
Sorry, my name's Roy. I've been working for a vendor for 32 years at a postdoc. So I came out of research, and I've worked with a lot of core labs, helped build a lot of core labs at Waters. So it's but I've been at ABRF almost as long. So I know what you guys what this community likes, and I also know what the vendor community likes. But I can only speak for me and my experience and for Waters. There's a ton of vendors, and they all have their own issues. So I'll make that huge caveat. So if any questions about how vendors work, I'll do the best I can. So thanks.
Hello, I'm Brooke. I am the director of 6 scientific core facilities that are mostly non-biological cores. In addition, we have 3 shops: machining, electronics, and glass blowing. I mention that because, in general, our units tend to run without service contracts. We do have a few, but primarily without service contracts, and that's because we've built up expertise within our managers and our shops personnel to support instruments. And so that's generally how we try and run our unit.
Great. Good morning, everybody. I'm Julie. I have been around the block a few years, actually. I started in flow cytometry, actually, in 1984, and then spent a number of years with David, actually, at the University of Chicago, where we developed a maintenance program for our instrumentation to try to balance the service contracting and maintenance costs with our core facility user needs and their funding that they had available to be able to support instrumentation that we were using. we developed what was called a self-insurance program at the University of Chicago, which I don't know if David still is using, but I suspect probably. But that's how he roped me into this session. I think I've moved out of being a technician in a core to being a manager and a director of a core to now being an individual who's responsible for many, many core facilities, and seeing the service contracting and equipment maintenance challenges from many perspectives, including one of finance, right? How do we afford to do the science that we want to do, to how do the users, what the user expectations are in our core facilities about having technology available and having technology working all the time, and balancing redundancy and expediency and, people who are doing cutting edge science. Looking at from all those different perspectives has given me, I think, some unique insights. I don't know if I can say any solutions, but maybe some unique perspectives. So I'm looking forward to having the conversation with my colleagues. I thank David for inviting me. He actually told me it was not an option. So I'm looking forward to mostly hearing from all of you as to what your challenges are.
So it's just to open up the discussion. Like, I think we over the last few years, we've seen the cost of service contracts kind of go up. The quality of the service contracts seems to go down for some groups. We see like some options are being removed. The guaranteed time is no longer something that's available in some contracts. The number of PMs might have dropped, and so we're moving in the directions where companies are kind of trying to adapt to more difficult economic issues. How did that impact? So going in reverse order, starting with Julie, how is that impacting your core facility, your budget, and overall the effort, the research effort in your institution?
Yeah, so I've been, for the last 2 years, I've been at the Salk Institute, which is a very small, research-intensive organization with 54 faculty. It was a very big change for me coming from much larger academic institutions. But the financial pressures, in some cases, the financial pressures, you feel are less because there's a lot more philanthropy that supports small research institutes. But philanthropic funds are hard to come by as well. And so the challenges that I've seen with service contracting since I've been at Salk have been, one, I think post-COVID, post-pandemic, costs have just increased. I had a service contract come across my desk recently where one of the cores wanted me to approve. I looked at it, and it was a $42,000 service contract on a $225,000 piece of equipment. And to me, my jaw dropped. I'm like, that's outrageous. The rule of thumb has always been 10% of the purchase price, right? I mean, there's kind of the thought that this instrument might depreciate over 10 years. And when I saw that, I just said, something's wrong here. Please go back and check. Is this a 2-year contract? Is this a 5-year contract? This can't possibly be. But it was legit, and we were able to negotiate it down a little bit. But seeing an increase where it's 15% to 20% of the purchase price was something that I knew that it was a new technology. The user base that we had in a small institution couldn't support the hourly rate to cover that service contract. And I was having the pressure from our CFO to say, you need to cut your budgets. We want to do more self-insurance. So I think that's finding that balance, right? Seeing the increase in costs for new technologies where we don't have a redundant instrument. If the instrument goes down, it's down, right? But we want it to be available. We don't necessarily have a big user base for it yet because it's cutting edge, but it's something that the community really wants access to. How do we balance those costs, right? That, I think, is what I've seen been happening. And it's not just with new technologies, it's with existing technologies as well. I feel like vendors are a little bit more pressed from a financial perspective on their end. I think it's harder for them. There was one company, I can't remember what it was, something in the NMR field where maybe it was Brooker, I don't know, but during the pandemic, their entire service team left or they had nobody. And so post-pandemic, they had a hard time bringing people back. And so they had to increase their service contracting costs because they had to pay people more. And I get it. I see all sides of it. I just don't have a solution to how do we come up with something in the middle that meets all of the needs, the user needs, the institute needs, the vendor needs. I don't know if I answered your question, David, but that's just kind of where I see things from my perspective. I'm managing cores in a research institute.
So we also have had significant financial pressures in the last few years at University of Arizona. And this year we've had to make a decision to cut a lot of our service contracts way back. And so it really was looking at what is needed versus what is wanted for some of the systems and making some difficult choices. Because, as you mentioned, the user fees for those services were not going to be able to cover the increased service costs that were being quoted for some of these systems. One of the things that we've done is built up expertise within our management. One of the things for that particular system is that manager actually went to the vendor and took a class on maintenance in the previous year. And so we've been able to kind of leverage that and make it a little bit more comfortable in cutting back service on those particular systems. I also have seen, on a positive light, I've seen a lot of increased remote service processes through the vendors that I've personally worked with. Since the pandemic started, I've noticed that I think service has gotten a lot better with respect to troubleshooting remotely, and I very much appreciate those channels, working with the vendors, doing team viewer calls, more remote troubleshooting kind of helps us get to a solution faster. So that's been a positive that I've seen since we've had the change in the staffing for the service units that we've worked with.
And from vendor, I got to ask one question. Are there any mass spec folks in here? All right. Have you still work on a mass spec? Awesome. That's my world. So service has gotten is different than when I started. It's now for a big vendor, for a major vendor, it's a business in itself. It is so expensive to hire people, to fly them around, to stock the parts, to train them, to keep them. That there are a lot more costs. The instruments are far more sophisticated. Back when I started, you could work on your own machine with a little bit of help. Somebody would come out occasionally and do a PM on the expensive parts, and you could get a board shipped, and we all knew how to drop a board in. Now there are no boards that you can drop in. There's no pieces you can touch. It's all software driven, and it changes a lot. So it takes a lot of expertise to do the big stuff. But if you're a more consumer product or sort of a lower level product like an LC, there is a lot of maintenance that you can do yourself. But the whole model has changed. Services also need to be their own business when they get to a certain scale. When you're just a handful of people making a couple of products and you got a good group of users, the guys that are selling it and the folks who are developing it are also the people helping you work on it. But when you've got 8,000 people in multiple countries, service becomes its own business. It has to then, it's a huge cost, so it has to then show a justification for the cost and some profit to pay the people to contribute to the bottom line. Our stockholders do not like us to run things at a loss. Our owners don't like that. So that's what's changed from the vendor standpoint, but I can go into lots of detail about some of those.
So I guess on that, it's somebody made the analogy of repairing your car back in the 50s, and nowadays, like it's kind of hard to do it right now. Just in terms of adapting to this economic situation, do you feel like the industry is losing customers in terms of the number of people buying into service contracts, and maybe without going into the details about the numbers with Waters, but is that something that...
No, it's growing.
It's growing still.
Still growing.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of something that we discussed yesterday at a flow cytometry meeting session here about service contracts. There was a survey made by a group called ISAC, and they survey all the users of flow cytometry equipment, ask everybody how many people have a service contract on all their instruments, on a portion of their instruments. It turns out 51% or so of people covered the entire set of machines in their car. An additional 39% is actually covering at least parts of the instruments within their car. So it's still a place where everybody seems to go to service contracts to maintain their equipment. I myself come from, like, I don't know, I'm Julie taught me everything I know, so I'm from a point of view where I still feel we should be able to repair our own things. And I kind of want to explore what exactly could be done to train the staff of core facilities to learn more about how to repair instruments. And is there any room to make, like, basically involve the core facility people to support industry in a way in repairing instruments?
Yeah, in the academic world, and I have to make the caveat that for our service, a lot of it's pharma, and they have different rules, and some of it's clinical, and they have very different rules. Right. But I'll focus on our academic world. To have someone in an academic at a core lab who's dedicated to running the instruments, who knows how to do it, who is a staff employee, is going to be there, is extraordinarily valuable. I mean, that just makes everything work. To have someone we can at least talk to, who can say, okay, this user called us up, new grad student, who are they? What do they want? And so we go to the people that we know and go back and say, look, what's going on with this instrument? Do you really need some help? And we get calls all the time and say, look, we got this other machine over in the corner, or we just adopted someone else's from an instrument from another lab. Can we include that, or can we get some parts on that? And said, look, we've already got a service contract on the new machine. When the guy comes out, we know that you can work on that. We'll find you the parts if you can come up with a little bit for the parts, and we'll help you do that. Mm-hmm. So there's huge amounts of flexibility in the academic world. But there are extremes on both ends, and the folks who can't or won't take care of their instruments are always a problem. And there are people who will do whatever it takes to keep their instruments up and going. So there's a big range. We've offered, at least personally for Waters, we've done tried to make a lot of flexible terms, PM only, parts insurance, and not a lot of people have taken us up on those.
Mm-hmm.
So Roy, I have a question for you, though, because your earlier comment struck a chord with me where you said instrumentation has changed over the years. And as David referred to, he grew up in a lab where we had great connectivity with our vendors, and they got to a point where they would send us parts. And I imposed upon my team to learn the technical pieces of the instrument, right, so that they could actually do repairs or get parts in and do some of that troubleshooting. And it was a great partnership. But if technology has changed so that it's harder to do that, like, it's harder to change the oil in your car these days, it's... has that been a factor? I mean, is that still how much instrumentation changes have changed the dependency on service contracting? Do you think there's
a lot? I mean, yeah, and it depends on
what. An interesting point to me.
I mean, yeah, I worked on my own mass spec. The 11-ton mass spec that sat in the basement. We did a lot of work on it when I was a grad student.
Yeah,
but we'd call the Japanese engineers and they'd talk us through things because they work on a flyer from Japan. But on our new instruments, I mean, they're so sophisticated that, very few people know how to actually make them run. And the ones that do are in high demand, and they love doing it.
Yeah.
The engineers love doing it, and they'll do stuff proactively. Oh, you're not really, we could do this a little bit better if you want to run that way. And so the sophistication's changed. Also, what everyone's talked about, so much of it's run by software. And when you can sort of remote in, and your IT group lets you remote in, and you've got the sophistication to sort of sit there and be patient enough to make the online time, and you can match time zones to the people that know how to do it. you can do a lot more. So yeah, that's changed tremendously.
But with the advent of those computer-based technologies, it would seem to me that remote support should be increasing as well. Should be an increasing option for people.
It is.
So that's cool. That's good to know.
Brooke, we discussed earlier, your group actually does a lot of repairs on your own instruments. You actually have a separate group of engineers that will actually fix some of the equipment that you have. Can you just say a few words about that?
Yeah, so we, as I mentioned before, we have 3 shops within the units that I supervise. And so we actually meet together twice a month and discuss issues in our units and put our heads together and brainstorm solutions. So our electrical engineer has been amazing and instrumental in keeping our systems going. He does component level repair, which helps us a lot with respect to working with vendors who may or may not be able to send us out boards. And then, if there's more of a mechanical problem, we talk to our machinists, and they've been working together for 20 years. So they really approach repair as kind of a team, which has helped our unit tremendously. So when I have issues in my personal lab with something, I don't have to test the power supplies myself. I usually go and see when the electrical engineer is available, and we sit there together and work through, because I have the knowledge of how the instrument works and he has the electronics and engineering background to kind of help figure out what's going wrong. So that's really helped our units and enabled us to be able to run mostly without service contracts. We also have, so I'll give another example, one of my managers, he does photoelectron spectroscopy, so he's an expert in vacuum science. He will stockpile parts for vacuum systems, but not only does he repair his own vacuum systems, but he actually offers that service to our users, so it's a user benefit as well. So he'll go into PI labs and train their students on how to detect vacuum leaks, how to replace oil in rough pumps, how to replace rough pumps, those sorts of things. And then all the way up to designing new vacuum systems. So I think building the expertise amongst my group has really given us a lot of flexibility with respect to service contracts and repairing our systems.
So I think at this point it strikes me that this discussion, like I'm the chair of I get to decide what we talk about, and so I'm from a place where we should really fix everything ourselves. And so that's where the discussions are. So I'm going to try to move it back to how to make a proper service contract for that will please everybody. Transitioning, let's discuss what are the other options if people try to lower the cost of purchasing service contracts. There's a range of things, negotiating multi-year contracts. There's asking underwriters, these type of issues, these type of solutions. Julie, can you say a few words on the topic?
Yeah, so I'd be happy to. This is something that I've thought about for many, many years. And as I said, when I was in Chicago, we developed what we called our own self-insurance program, but it wasn't just self-insuring. It was actually a maintenance program that allowed us to look at basically 3 options, right? It was, should we have an OEM contract, an original equipment manufacturer service contract? Should we have a third-party insurer? Those were starting to well, I shouldn't say they were starting to become available, because I understand there's companies out there that have been around for 40 or 50 years, but they were becoming known to me, so we thought maybe that's an option. There were also starting to be a few companies that were doing service in some areas, especially in flow cytometry. There was a company that was up and coming that said, we'll come in and work on your instruments, as opposed to the OEM. So I guess there's actually 4 options. The 4th option was, we just don't buy a service contract. We still include the cost in our rates, but we include the cost of 50% of a service contract. So we're still generating money from recharge rates to be able to pay for service, time and material services when we needed it. but that required us to keep track of our instrumentation utilization, redundancy, service history, right? And make an informed decision every year whether or not we wanted to buy, whether we felt an instrument needed a service contract or not. And so we developed something similar to a catastrophic repair program, really, where we kind of had some money in the bank, but if we didn't have to spend $20,000 every year, but only had a catastrophic repair every 3 years, right? We had 60 grand or 30 grand or whatever it was in the bank to be able to pay for that catastrophic repair when it was needed. But in the meantime, we had saved money. That's kind of the approach that we looked at, looking at multiple options, recognizing that there were multiple options out there, but having to make a decision every year for every instrument that we had. And that's a lot of administrative work. So if you think about what the administrative burden is on there balanced against, the cost savings, that's something that we had to think about. So those were the options that I think still exist in my mind today, are those same kind of decision points.
And do you think there's it seems like we just discussed how the instruments are getting harder and harder to repair. Is that a viable option moving forward, or do you think we're going to need to switch at some point?
I still feel it's a viable option going forward, but I might be making that statement from an uninformed perspective, right, based on my history, because I don't know how much of our instrumentation we can do hands-on. I also don't know how many of our core scientists have the opportunity or time to actually spend learning the intricacies of their instrumentation, right? Can they open them up? Can they look inside? Can they pull parts out or not? Do our core teams actually have the time to be able to do that and gain that experience? So my assumption is that they do. I look at some of my core team members that are here and they're like, yeah, absolutely not, Julie. We don't have time to do that. I see the head shaking right now. So, every day I learn something new too about whether or not we can actually, continue on with the things that I think are appropriate measures.
I'm just asking because it seems to me that the service contracts are kind of eclipsing what we would normally call as just service your instrument. If you want a service engineer to come to your lab, you're going to go after everybody else in terms of service contract. And so in that sense, your core staff is just
one caveat. That depends on your relationship with your vendor.
Of course. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Lost my train of thoughts here. Sorry.
Well, I actually thought though that was true. Do you go to the bottom of the list, right? People often told me that was the case. I've never experienced it. In my core teams, when I was in the lab, I didn't experience it. I didn't know, though, if it was also because I pushed people really hard, right? And I'm not a silent person. And so I thought, maybe if I'm a complainer, the vendors will respond to me so that I don't tell the rest of the community how frustrated I am with them. But I don't actually think I'm that special. I don't think I complain that much. Maybe I do. But I don't, never experienced that. And it was all with regard to how what that relationship was with the vendor. And I often found that service engineers were very happy to help out, right? And do telephone troubleshooting because it made their jobs easier as well, right? They're in a service industry, just like I was in a service industry. They want their clients to be happy. They wanted me to be happy, so they wouldn't they just wanted to make sure that they were serving my needs as well. And so I don't really feel that without the service contract, I was impacted that much. But there might be. I'd love to hear from others out there who feel like their services have been delayed because of it.
But the other solution would be reducing the cost of the service contract through underwriters. What's the opinion of the panels on these type of solutions? Oh, sure. Please reach the microphone.
lead to it.
Okay. Has any of your academic institutes tried to negotiate the contracts through your corporate office, either working with management or purchasing instead of you negotiating contracts with the vendors? Does it help us? I'm sure as core faculties, we are not aware of all the instruments that a vendor has our institute, but materials and management and purchasing, they would be aware, and they can bring the bigger pool of users on the table.
I can speak to that. We've done that. And what happened when I reached out to purchasing for one of the systems that we do keep under service contract and said, okay, well, there's probably others of this on campus or from this vendor. Can you provide a list? And they could not. So what I had to do instead was reach out we have a distributed core system on our campus. So I reached out to some of the other core managers and just by word of mouth found the other systems on campus with that same vendor, then talked to the vendor and said, okay, well, now we have 3 of these instead of just 1, all under service contract. What can you do for us? And they did come back and say, okay, well, we'll give you a multi-tool discount, even though you're paying from different units on campus because you're all part of University of Arizona. So that was effective, but it did require me to do some of the legwork. And maybe in the future that will get better. So I'm hopeful.
All right. Thank you.
No, it's been my experience as well. It's had to be done through the cores. I've reached out to procurement teams, but they're focused on other things. So
I have a couple of questions for everybody and then also for you. Sorry. So I just want a show of hands. Who here actually has instruments under service contract? Great. How many of you are actually satisfied with your service contract? How many think you're getting your money's worth out of your service contracts? So it depends on the vendor. Yeah.
how many don't know whether they're getting their money's worth out? How many is just a mystery? Yeah.
So one of the things I've tried, and I want to know if any of you have tried this, is for one of my main vendors, I kept track of how much I paid for service contract and how much they came out. And I found out I basically had hired someone to do zero work for me because the instrument never needed it. Did either of you ever try getting some money back for future service contracts because they never actually performed any work for what you paid them to do?
Say, what's the question? Say the point.
What's the point? Awesome. No,
I didn't hear the last sentence. I'm sorry.
So what I try to do with my main vendor is like, hey, I paid you for 4 years of service contract. You only came out and did PMs, which is like a fraction of the cost. Why should I keep paying you this massive amount doing nothing? I could have actually saved that money and actually hired someone to help me, which I would much rather have had. I was curious if you'd had any benefit or luck reducing future costs based off of past performance, either positive or negative, from your service contracts.
I can speak. Yeah, I can speak to that one. I've had a couple of different experiences with that. I had one vendor who couldn't get out to do their maintenance, the paid for maintenance visits, and they on their own basically extended the service contract and said, well, we didn't get out and do everything we need to do in 12 months, so we're going to cover you for another 6 months, and then schedule the visit within that 6 months. And so they did that on their own, which was wonderful. I've also had the experience where a vendor did not deliver on what they were supposed to deliver on. And in that case, the manager had to keep records, write down every single conversation you have with the vendor, make notes of when they're there, what they do. And then we had to discuss with the PI who was involved with this particular instrument, and then go through our purchasing and contracting office to write the vendor a letter saying this is unacceptable. Once the contracting office sent the letter, then the vendor paid attention and extended the service contract. So those were the two biggest experiences. I've had more minor experiences with it, but those were the biggest ones.
I've never had a vendor extend a service contract like that or agree to provide some money back or any kind of discount. I have had conversations with a third-party insurer. I'm not going to name any names. They are in the room, though. So I expect something at lunchtime, maybe. Or at least in the bar. But I do think that, I mean, there are programs where they're big enough organizations where they can say, if you don't use all of your service contracting costs, we'll look at how we can continue to insure you next year and how you might get a rebate on that or something like that. It was the first time I've ever had anybody talk to me about that. And I historically have been pretty against third-party vendors, but I think that there's some real value in looking at that again. So I would encourage you all to consider that, and that might be a way that's the only time I've ever heard that happen, though, Joe, is that it's come from, an organization that manages a lot of contracts. I do think there is a burden, as Brooke said, about tracking all service, all downtime on your instruments, all incidents that you have. So because, our memory is such that we may think we've had a lot of service on an instrument, and when you write it down and you go back and look at it, you actually, have had maybe one or two service calls, right? But you think it was an enormous amount. So there are the software tools that we use for usage tracking and instrument and billing now have ways to track incidents in there. And I encourage you all to do that. It's an easier way than, putting on a spreadsheet or, writing on a, pad of paper when you had a service call.
What do you actually use to do that?
Pardon me?
What tools do you use to track your...
We use Stratacore's PPMS software, and there's an incident tracking thing in there. We can also track downtime, how much time the instrument is down, which also relates to lost revenue, right? And that's another thing that I look at in when I'm trying to negotiate service contracting costs. But there are a lot of tools out there that we can use to help us do exactly what you said and exactly what Brooke is doing in her lab.
Did I add?
Go ahead.
At one point, Joe, 4 years of very no service call. I'm assuming some of that was under warranty. Yeah, 1 year, okay. And this is where extended warranties are a good idea. This is just my philosophy, not a policy. Okay, but if you can get an extended warranty, you should be able to get in the first 2-3 years or something a good idea how much work this instrument is going to take. And when you go back to the vendor and say, look, it's been flawless. Whatever you've done, it works great. Perhaps we don't need to have a PM every year. Perhaps we can go to remote support or just a coverage on parts. And consolidate that with maybe another instrument from the vendor that's already come in and say, look, you're buying this one. Well, why don't we just tack that, that service contract onto the warranty for this one, because we're already going to have somebody coming out doing the work on that one. And there are lots of ways that you can put your own knowledge, like Julie's saying, these machines don't break. Why do we need to pay somebody to fix them when they don't break?
But you also find in that 1 year or extended warranty period, that instrument that was built on a Friday afternoon.
Well, yeah.
Right? That lemon out there that just needs repair all the time. Absolutely have a service contract on that instrument, right? But your tools, your instruments, so...
And the last one I'll say is know your users. If that instrument is doing what it's supposed to be doing every day, the same routine, that's great. But if it's facing a new group of students every semester and they have to be retrained, then perhaps you might put a little more effort behind it.
I'll just add one note and have your question afterwards. On the idea of tracking repairs on your instrument and any kind of service, you should absolutely do that because it will allow you to predict whenever the next problem is going to occur and maybe budget consequently. So it's totally something that's worth your time.
Hi, Matt DeVries to the vote. I don't know how realistic this would be for more sophisticated instruments, but I had a scientific instrument repair guy who was able to negotiate to get trained and certified as a warranty service rep for Panasonic ultra cold freezers, Sterling ultra cold, then Revco pre-merger, and then that allowed us to do anything that could be fixed by just calling on the phone saying this is wrong. We were able to run those freezers without service contracts, without warranties, because he was certified to be able to work on those.
And then it had the unexpected downstream effect of, procurements. When someone wanted to buy an ultracold, they would be like, well, you need to use one of these three because we can service these things cheap on site. Drove down the quotes from the other vendors who wanted to get in the space. But he was able to, if he couldn't fix stuff himself, he did have access to the parts lists. And then he was able to do a lot of remote work, FaceTiming with the techs remotely. And then we knew if we did have to fly a tech in, we absolutely knew that it was required in that situation. It wasn't one of those where we have to fly them into town, pay that money, have them look at it, find out it needs another part, fly them out, fly them back 3 weeks later. We avoided a lot of that. I don't know how well that would work for a mass spec or a flow cytometer, but it was pretty successful for us with freezers. So, I guess that's, I'm done.
That's a good time to introduce my very special secret panelist. And you reached a great session when you have a secret panelist. And no other session as these. This person managed to negotiate with the manufacturers a service contract where the manufacturers would guarantee a response time and a back online time, if you will. Like the machine had to be fixed in a specific time delay. Otherwise, the company would have to pay back a significant fee to make them in or whatever. And secondly, the service contract also included a training portion for the staff so that they would be in better position to diagnostic any issues. And so she traveled all the way from Europe and came here to ABRF just to make us feel bad. So please join me in welcoming Marjolijn Hameetman. So can you give us a few, just a general idea of what happened and how did the whole thing happen for on your end?
So I joined the Corps in 2019. It was founded in 2017, and we had quite a large group of instruments from one vendor. I was surprised on how things were arranged because I understood we paid a large amount of service fees, but the service wasn't there. So I went to my director and said, well, can we send an email? Because we have planned PMs for the whole year. We have research and diagnostic instruments, and now we have a planned PM, but the engineer is coming and he doesn't even have the PM kit. How is this possible? So he said, okay, let's write an email. So I reached out to the company. We sat down, had a meeting, discussed all the points that were not going well. It was a large list, so we sent up an action list, what should be improved, and we kept on going with that. So every 3 months we had an evaluation meeting, and in the end, we also discussed to set up service training for our staff, so they know that the staff is properly trained. So what we do if we have an incident, we write down a call, say this is the thing that is going wrong. This is everything that we have tried. We know that this part is down, so we want you to order that and let us know when an engineer is coming. And, well, we had a really good connection with the vendor. So that's also helped when we set up the new service contract. And in there, we wanted to have a response time, also the on-site time, and also a guaranteed uptime. So we know that the instruments have a certain depreciation time. It's different from what the vendor says than what our institution keeps on tracking. But yeah, they approved. It's different for instruments that are new or that are old. They have different service levels. So if you have the highest level of service, there is a higher uptime taking along. And we keep track of that. We also have PPMS, so we can track the downtime of the instruments as well. And that is what we communicate during these evaluation meetings. What are the incidents? What have we done? What could we improve on software, hardware, also for new developments? And now is this something that we take along with other vendors as well? If you already have a contract, it's difficult to get it in. But if you buy new equipment through a tender procedure, for example, then we write all these new rules or things that we would like to have in there, and they accept. So we have now multiple companies that we have all these KPIs in, and there are multiple times that we already had sent the fee that they have, the fine that they had to pay. So it's like $15,000 they have to pay if the uptime is below the 95%.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
It's awesome.
So I think this is the type of stuff I'd like to discuss for the remainder of our gathering together. It's basically these ideas on how to make the service contract work a little bit better for you instead of just waiting for the service engineer show up when you. I'm sorry. You have a question that you. I am so sorry.
That's okay. Susanna Perkins from UMass. I just wanted to throw out the comment that we just finished a very painful process doing master service agreements for multi-years in both our cryo-EM and flow. This was brought on by a new purchasing person who worked hand-in-hand with us. And it benefits us from going from a single-digit discount to a double-digit discount. But we had to co-term every instrument, which has been very painful for year one. But not only that, but UMass required us to do a very long contract every service renewal. So this is one contract up front. We just do a PO for every time beyond the first year. We just finished it up. And it was working very closely with these two vendors. But it produced a huge discounts for the amount of work that we did, just to ruin out that, because we've never done it before.
Right.
So, Susanna, that's one of the things that that I've thought about doing as well for us at Salk. The administrative time that it took for you to do that, it sounds like it was a painful process.
It was painful, yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of time.
It involved purchasing. Purchasing really was a driving factor with the vendors. So we had to meet with everything we had. And then, of course, with all our equipment, it came due at all different times of the year. So then we had to co-term. So we have a lot of contracts that are X amount of months. So this year's kind of, financially not proven what we're really going to hit for year two. And then also we need the flexibility. So if we retire an instrument or turn it in, that we're out of the contract and a new one goes in.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it will have a huge time savings for the contracts and then money too. So we're pleased with how it's coming out, but it was painful.
Yeah. So I think the thing that I just learned in terms of, utilization tracking or downtime tracking, it's not only good for internally to make decisions about whether or not service contracts are important or necessary, or whether we should, have a full contract or parts and PM contract or no contract. But it seems like it was also really helpful for negotiating with the vendor. Actually, it was really important information that you had to be able to say, here's our books, right? This is what our downtime was. I never really thought of using the data in that way. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, so what we also do is we have for new equipment is that we have then within the contract, we already negotiate for 10 years. So the price is, it's just 10 years and the only adjustments they can make every year. So we will say 10 years and you can quote annually, but the increase cannot be more than 2% of indexation.
And then do you have the option to, anywhere in those 10 years to say, nope, I'm not gonna renew this year for that instrument?
No. So you're stuck for 10 years.
Yeah.
For new instrument, a little nervous. We know that they will, we have instruments of 18 years, right? So we know we take care of the instruments, so they will stick for 10 years.
Yeah.
For other companies, we have a 3-year contract with the ability to prolong 2 times 1 year. And we can say we want to add another year. That's
Well, first, our secret panelists are available for consult, because I think I guess my question is really posed to the panel as well as the rest of the group here, and that's on the third circle there in this Venn diagram, and it may be part of the last segment, is just the user value. And a lot of times when we're assessing these agreements, we're running into what's the faculty value to this, and there's a gradient of the ways that we kind of judge that. Is it involved live animals or longitudinal studies, and try and figure out what the impact of losing this agreement could be. If you're 6 months in and suddenly you got an $80,000 camera out, you're kind of SOL. And so we're seeing this more and more and particularly in the spatial field where there's significant investments per run. And so we're almost strapped with needing to keep that instrument no matter what, right? And then another perspective on this, and again, it's just a thought exercise that I'd love to hear all your responses, is we look at this from a grant perspective. How many grants are associated with the use of this instrument? And we also see that a number of times with these more sophisticated technologies, they're tied to high dollar grants to the university, both for research and recovering the indirects to the university, right? But they're low throughput. So it just further complexes this decision-making process. And a lot of times we feel essentially handcuffed into maintaining this agreement. And despite that feeling, it does make it even easier to pay. So at any rate, just posing it to the group, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and experience on that too. Oh, Alex Kramer, University of Minnesota.
Anybody wants to comment on that? The value for researchers?
When we started this session, I was thinking about all the different, the different stakeholders in here. And there's, Susanna's comment about, the work that she did with procurement, and there's so many different stakeholders here in this that should be in the conversation. There's, what is everybody's perspective from the finance teams, from procurement teams, from contracting teams to the core itself and the pressures that they feel from those teams, finance, and then the pressures that they feel from their users and the researchers. And that, I think, is where, the conundrum comes in for, the core teams and the core scientists is trying to manage everybody's expectations. And the expectations of the user community is that they have an instrument that's going to be there and do what they need it to do whenever they need it to, whenever they need access to it.
They need that at a fair price.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's a tough spot.
Typically. This question for Mr. Martin. You mentioned that it's a business, and then their existence of these third-party intermediaries as well. Is it a good business?
I hate it when people ask the question about third-party. It's hard to group, and there's some really good organizations with good people, and we occasionally lose really our good engineers because they can do some of the work. However, the real thing about you're paying service twice. You're paying for a risk. Okay, you're paying for the third party to be able to do most of the things until they can't, and then they have to come negotiate with the original vendor to get the parts, to get the expertise to fix the thing that they can't do. And so that negotiation is something that you probably aren't going to be part of, and you may not like the results of. So it's how you want to judge your risk. And we just don't encourage it generally because we want the relationship. I mean, the relationship to a original equipment vendor is more important than anything. So if you've got a relationship with a third-party service provider, that may be great for a lot of the stuff that you do. But if you really want to get on the cutting edge or keep really critical things going, then that's an important decision to make. It's a risk management decision that you got to make. Does that help?
It does. And I guess, is it a profit center or do you run it at cost?
They're definitely profit centers.
Okay.
I mean, they have to pay for what they do. That's part of the company. You've got to be a part of it. Yeah.
My second question is, does the presence of consumables volumes impact how these contracts are negotiated? Like if an instrument's down and it's generating consumables, obviously the vendor has greater interest in pairing it.
when there's a consumables business, it makes things a little bit more fluid, but I'm not really part of that organization. I'm usually dealing with instruments. And so, the cost of consumables is minuscule compared to the cost of technology. But if you go downscale a little bit to, something that LCs that live with columns, then that could be significant. And, to the promise of, hey, service engineer always carries a couple of columns in his car, and if that's the problem, then here, just take it. Don't ask any questions. It's part of what I can do for you. That's not going to happen with a third-party person. It's not going to happen, with a lot of folks that they're going to do that. It's just the access and that to the knowledge and to what has to go on.
Okay, and maybe for the other panelists, are there agreements struck where if you meet certain consumables volumes, your fixed cost of your agreement will flex down because you're compensating the vendor in other ways?
I've actually never seen that. I've seen it more because I've always had this impression, and maybe it's no longer accurate, that instrument sales and reagent sales, different division in most organizations from service, right? And service has their own budget, service has their own goals, and they don't necessarily tie into the part of the organization that makes money from reagents and stuff. I've only seen the impact of reduced cost for buying instruments when tied to a reagents contract, but not for service. Anybody else seen that? And that's still the case for, you think, Roy?
Yeah.
In most organizations.
I never did. I had this reduced contract cost, but and another it's just.
You've reduced service contracts for reagent with reagent?
So, yeah, I just wanted, when you said that you wanted to get your full contract set, definitely wanted to have it go through your legal, because I had a situation where I had to send back the contract and get the money back. So it is a good idea to have your legal system to be definitely set up well before you get your contract on. That is one of the major ones I wanted to tell. Then the next one, which I was like, with regard to the third party, I'm Murli from Stevenson Cancer Center, Oklahoma. So we had one more. This one was, there was a third party who said that, oh, we will do everything from the manufacturers. Everything will be fine. After like 2 months later, they say that, oh, we can't do it. We will refund you. So this can happen from a third party also. So that is one more option which I have seen in my career. And then the next one which I had was regarding, the last one was, I completely missed it and missed the line of thought. Anyway, I have a question for you, people who are really taking into account all your software. Which is the software you're using, so that almost all of us will be using that? Because I don't know, you said PPMS. What is that? Yeah, I'm not sure what it is.
So it's a management and booking system.
Okay.
So our users have an account within this system.
Mm-hmm.
The account is linked to a, how do you say that? Department finance account number, for example. So every quarter we will bill the amount of hours they have used the instrument within our facility.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, the third thing which I had in my mind was, I just got it back. Sometimes even local people will be very useful who have been trained by the manufacturer and still be able to use that. We have one of them who was great, actually. So sometimes it's a hit or miss. So about the local also, some people just be great on some of the equipment. So I just wanted to throw all these three things. Thank you.
I'll just add a small note on the use of Stratocore software. I think it's a business opportunity that the tool is included within a giant scheduling system, managing billing and stuff like that. It's an overkill if you just want to track your instruments. So I think the tools should be developed separately by other groups and make available. I think that's a nice business opportunity that's it's kind of being missed here. Please.
Okay. Hi, Gary Ward from Dartmouth. To answer Julie's comment about she'd never seen a vendor offer a reduced rate. We actually, this isn't a flow instrument, by the way. It was a different instrument, but we bought an instrument, and the company was really wanting to get usage, and so they told us that if you can use so many kits in a year, we'll give you a free service. And right now, the technology hasn't caught on, so we haven't been using the prerequisite number of kits. So we are paying for the service, but anyway. And then the other comment was about one of Julie's comments was third party. We had a neighboring core that had third party coverage. They had a lot of repairs, a lot of repairs this one year. The third party came back and said, "We're going to have to raise your rates because you use so much service." So it goes both ways. Yes, both ways.
Point.
And the other thing was, at one time, this is just a couple of years ago, our purchasing department had a really good idea where they wanted to have a dedicated technician on campus for all the cores and all the different disciplines. And they came up with the idea of hiring somebody full-time who would be cross-trained in all these. He could work on flow cytometers, he could work on mass spec, he could work on all these different systems. The problem when they get all around and ready, it was going to be cost prohibitive. So even though they were going to set this up and do it, it was going to cost us more than it would be to just do service contracts.
Where's the cost exactly?
I'm sorry, what?
Why is it cost prohibitive exactly? Maybe.
No, it was like twice as much as what we were paying for service contract.
Oh,
they quoted us a price in house. It was we were insuring through our own institution basically, and it wasn't covered by any indirects or anything. It was going to be coming out of our budget.
Got it.
Like yeah.
So maybe sorry. Yeah, what I want to add is that we also negotiated an extra warranty year. So normally you will get 1 year. We negotiated 2 years, so that will save up also an extra year of service. We are also a European demo center for one of the companies, and we get access to their newest developments. So we have one instrument that was placed in our facility for nothing, and we don't pay any service. And after the contract will end, we can buy the instrument for half of the price. So that's also something that you could think of.
Sir.
Morning, my name is Sean. I'm from Texas, San Antonio. I have two questions. First, the sort of special guest speaker. So in the negotiations you had, did you leverage kind of the pooled resource and funding strategies to kind of say, like, we have XYZ instruments across so many of our areas, kind of have that leverage to go into that negotiation?
Yeah. So luckily, we are a large core, so we have 24 instruments and over 800 users. So our instruments are really heavily used, so that makes the usage is so high for some instruments, over 2,000 hours a year. So that makes the hourly rate go down a lot for the users as well. So yeah.
And the second question is for really all panelists. I'm really curious to see what kind of creative funding sources you've had to help with paying service contracts, even if it's very unique to your institution. That'd be interesting to get ideas.
Well, the most unique thing I had was when our CFO told me, we can't afford service contracts. I want you to self-insure. And I said, okay. When our instruments go down, though, we're going to have them serviced, and you are going to pay for those repairs. And she said, of course. And I said, okay, I'd like it in writing. So it's kind of a creative approach. I still wasn't very comfortable with it. They also told me, I don't need it in writing. My word is good. I'm a very distrusting person. But it's a creative approach, which I'm not still sure whether it's a good one or not. Anybody else have any?
I don't know if this is a word that you use as well as like a lease construction. So this is something that we also have. Yeah.
Creative, we mostly self-insure, and if the repair goes over the pool of money that I sit on for this, then I will have to go to my department head and ask. And likely it could come from maybe one of our foundation accounts or from one of the other accounts that he controls. So as I mentioned, University of Arizona, we have distributed cores. The cores in my unit, we do service the whole university. We're not department specific, but our subsidy does come through the College of Science and through our department. In the past, we have gone to other colleges and asked them to contribute to the subsidy based on usage in the core. And you have to make the case for that. So that was the way.
I will say at the University of California, Davis, they did have, through the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research, they had what was called a catastrophic repair program, which was funded by the Institute. The VCR's office would put funding aside to encourage not having full service contracts, but doing catastrophic repairs as well. So that might be something that your organization might be interested in looking at from a collective, as opposed to individual core by individual core.
And can I ask one general question that it's not really that creative, but how many of you guys have considered instrument leases? A few. And it's, for some of the stuff that we see, that's actually a really good idea. A closed lease where you get an upgrade at the end or you can buy it out, that sort of thing. It's just like you do with the cars. It's hard for us, but it actually works. Yeah.
Did that lease in service contract?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's like warranty. Yeah, 3 years. You don't pay for a thing. Because we're going to actually make that run. I mean, within reason. If you drop it off from loading dock, it's but it's just generally we want you to run this, and you get the chance to look at your use rates and how that goes, and how long it's going to be useful to your community. And if it's not new after 3 or 5 years, then perhaps your community wants the newer version, and we're right there to just swap it out. Yeah.
I actually just to add to this, Debbie Lazzarino, Rutgers University. So on tomorrow, 2:00, we have a panel discussion about that, and we dealt a lot with that. So originally, when we did leases, the university didn't push for service contracts in the lease cost, but now we do. So it's a hard ask up front, but then at least we're covered during the lease period. That's helped a lot.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. I'm curious. I see the self-insurance is pretty attractive in terms of value proposition because the money stays within your institution and you're only buying what you need. But I'm kind of curious, since there's not necessarily an official expenditure for these repair costs, do you have to be careful in running afoul of your direct costing committees in terms of setting up your recharge rates because you don't actually have that cost?
Well, I can speak to it a little bit. What I do for some of our systems that can have expensive repairs every 3 to 5 years, for example, is then you basically just average that cost when you're working with the rate studies office. So we show evidence of we paid this repair 3 years ago, but it's averaged over 5 years. We expect to pay it again in 5 years. And that's how we include it. But you do have to talk to the rate studies office and kind of go through that with them so that they understand.
And you have to get them to recognize that you might carry a little bit of surplus in 1 year or in 2 years, right, to be able to cover that catastrophic repair in the third year. But once you can show that and show that you have these periodic repairs, it's a lot easier to get that past the accountants and the finance people to allow you to carry more of that forward.
Thank you. So help me out here. So we don't do service contracts in our core. So my understanding is you have the best leverage when you first buy the instrument. That's when you can, negotiate whatever you want, and the vendor really wants that instrument in your facility, so they'll do most of what you want. After that point, when you come to renew your service contract, what kind of leverage can you actually utilize to lower the costs? And are there ways we can discuss here to help you? Maybe we're talking about tracking the service that were needed on the instrument. If you have all that information, will that help reduce the cost of a service contract the second time around and make funding easier to show to?
I can't imagine it would help reduce the cost, because then you're able to show the vendor how much time they've been there, how much expense it's been for them. I mean, we have to be realistic. There's a cost to the vendors, right? And they can't give this to us for free, right? We have to come up with the right partnership. But I always feel like data is knowledge.
Absolutely.
On both sides.
And it helps your relationship too. I mean,
yeah.
You see, like, we've had a guy here who's way more than we expected, but he's wonderful. He's really helpful. We really like having him around. We considered buying another instrument because he does that service. And if you would sort of include his time and that time. So,
yeah,
there are ways to, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
I'm not going to speculate anymore.
But is that pretty much the only thing you would do, or is there?
No, data helps. Consolidation helps. When it comes to renegotiating, just asking for a discount. Yeah, it's possible because we have the service has its own sales group. They're selling contracts. But to come back with some knowledge is like, look at our usage, look at the number of people that are published, look at the other things. And then you bring your sales guy into the package and said, okay, this lab is doing a lot for this vendor, and we might be funded for another one and another one. Like, can you make us a good deal so we keep running?
Right.
I mean, all that's data.
Yeah.
All these are things that you could do. Not to say they all work, but it's useful.
Yeah. So what we do during the quarterly evaluation meetings is give the vendor more feedback about software, hardware, everything. The price will never go down. It will always go up. But within the contract, we try to keep it as minimal as possible, of course. But we have seen that it will eventually pay off, because we have seen the prices being doubled in some companies. The service contracts have doubled since we already had the contract before, and seen people that started off without a contract and later on wanted to have one. They paid double the price, and it's really large.
Yeah, I recently had a service contract up 300%.
Wow.
Yeah. But I also just bought another instrument from that company, and I was able to negotiate. So put a 5-year service contract on, because they can give a bigger discount when you buy the instrument than when you're renewing the service contracts. And I negotiated discounts on all of my service contracts from that company at the same time, because it all went on the same purchase order. But it took a lot of negotiation to get all of that. But it's something to keep in mind. If it's an instrument you're going to be running for 5 years, get a 5-year service contract when you buy the instrument. And I got that like a 45% discount on the service contract price. But it's getting kind of ridiculous when you can replace the instrument, and with what you're spending on the service contract over the course of 4 years, it's the same price to just buy a new instrument. It's not a value proposition at that point.
So what we say is always we keep track on, it's around 5 to 10% of the list price that we pay for a service contract, depending on the complexity of the instrument. So if it's like a mass cytometer is more complex than a simple flow cytometer, of course. But yeah, we have seen issues that we got a new instrument that was new on the market. We had so many issues, so we tracked that, and eventually we got a new instrument. It was completely replaced within 1.5 years because it was not performing well. Yeah.
So I'm Spencer Short. I'm the director of research facilities at Institute Pasteur in Paris. I'm also competing interest. I'm the founder of the company Stratum that provides this software that has been mentioned several times. And I picked up your comment about what a brilliant business opportunity it would be to spin out a little bit that works. And I would draw us back then to the comment in our Waters representative that actually data is super important. And if you listen to some of the more clever solutions about how to manage your service contracts and get value proposition from this, it's actually about working with the companies, and you have to give them data to justify your arguments. You have to have data-driven, evidence data-driven arguments to convince the company both of the value you bring, but also of the
incompetence or competence that they bring to the table. That puts you in a very powerful position. And actually, the whole proposition of software being a holistic approach to data is that you have to have all of that other stuff being recorded within the software in order to come to the table, sit down with whichever company it may be.
I guarantee we have that data too.
We're very excited about that data. We sit down together and then we work out, is this working? How is it working? And where can we go? And, I think that way you can come up with local solutions that really make a lot of sense within particular environment, region, country, culture you're working in, but also looking at the company's interests as well. I think ABRF is super good at doing so. Something that this kind of discussion really drives, and it's rather unique to ABRF. So thanks so much.
Thanks, sir.
There's a minute left. I think we're going to stop here. I'm sorry. Do you have a quick question? Or
Just wondering if anybody thought, another sticking point in service contracts is that the costs hit you once in a year. So it's a big cost and more often at the beginning of the year. So it skews your budget for a while until it levels down. So if anybody has negotiated getting invoiced monthly versus annually.
I actually see that more as an accounting issue within your institution. So with some of our service contracts, our accounting team prorates them, and it only hits the core budget once a month, a 12th of it. In other cases, it hits all at the same time. But it really, I think, is more an institutional issue than negotiating with the company for that.
All right. I think we'll stop here. I want to thank my panelists. This has been a great discussion. I'm also a fact ABRF takes this matter seriously. They actually managed to convince the hotel to organize a space where we can continue this discussion. They called it the bar, and that's when we go. So we'll meet you there later today. Thanks. Have a good day, guys.